Right before she passed away, Empress Maria Alexandrovna made a confession to her husband that was so gut-wrenching, he burst into tears. Even during her glory years, Empress Maria was something like a ghost walking the halls of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. As frail as she was beautiful, the haunting royal often hid from balls and other official events, preferring to let her boisterous, domineering husband take the spotlight. But behind closed doors, Maria kept painful secrets. Born in Darmstadt as the daughter of Grand Duke Ludwig of Hesse and his wife Wilhelmine, Maria was raised woefully ignorant and naive. From the moment of her birth, a scandalous rumour suggested that she wasn't actually the Duke's true daughter, but rather the product of her mother's illicit affair with the strapping Master of Stables. In 1839, Maria came face to face with her destiny. That year, the heir to the Russian Empire, the hard-partying Tsarevich Alexander, came to Europe on a grand tour to find himself a bride. From the minute he set eyes on Maria at her father's house, he was completely in love with her. Still, since these are royals we're talking about, it can't be romantic without also being creepy. While Alexander was in his 20s, Maria was just 14 years old. Within days, he'd written back home to his father and mother, the reigning Czar and Tsarina, insisting that he'd found his bride in Maria, and he would look no further. While Alexander's father was willing to approve the match, the Tsarina, who was born Charlotte of Prussia, absolutely despised the idea. Thinking her own ancestral Germanic house better than Hesse, she sneered at Maria's heritage. But more than that, she believed the rumours of Maria's illegitimacy and scorned the idea of a love child polluting the glory of her Russian Empire. Over the next months, Alexander visited Maria in her home city of Darmstadt as much as humanly possible, while Maria herself pored over Russian books, single-mindedly trying to learn Russian as quickly as she could. With the help of Maria's ambition and studies, plus the fact that Alexander threatened to give up the throne rather than give up his bride, the young couple finally got what they wanted. The Tsarina gave her permission for the union to go ahead, and by the end of the summer, Maria packed up and headed to Russia. She couldn't have known it then, but she was walking into a nightmare. Growing up in a quiet, austere court as the maybe illegitimate child of an affair had not done wonders for Maria's confidence, so she entered the decorative and declarative city of St. Petersburg as a shy, reserved princess who, while very ready to do her duty, wasn't very ready to party. In other words, she was at complete odds with the spirit of the city, and it began to show fast. When Maria chose Alexander as her fiancé, she may have forgotten one crucial thing. He loved parties. So much so that when it came time to pick the wedding date, he decided it should be on the eve of his 23rd birthday, making it more his day than hers. Thus, at the end of April 1841, Maria became an official member of the Russian Imperial family. Even though Maria grudgingly put in FaceTime at court parties, she did a horrible job of hiding her distaste for the opulence of St. Petersburg. People began to see her as boring, even disdainful, spurring her father-in-law Emperor Nicholas I, one of her only allies, to forbid anyone from sullying her name in his presence. Throughout the 1840s, Maria gave birth to a succession of children. While her first child, Alexandra, was a girl, the next three, Nicholas, Alexander and Vladimir, were coveted male heirs and completed the happy family. For a few shining years, the royal couple lived an idyllic lifestyle, constructing private gardens for their children and generally presenting a united front. Then, in 1849, it all came crashing down. Alexander and Maria had always doted on their eldest and at that point only daughter Alexandra, but a vicious twist of fate tore her from their lives. When she was 6, Alexandra fell ill and died of meningitis. Alexander and Maria were determined to push on after the passing of Alexandra, and a year later Maria gave birth to yet another child, a son they named Alexei. Her joy was a double-edged sword. The couple still craved a daughter, but more importantly, The weight of the past decade was starting to take a toll. Maria had birthed almost as many children as years she'd been married to Alexander, and the physical strain took her health to the very edge. In 1853, all Maria's prayers were answered. Just before she turned 30, she gave birth to a daughter, Maria. In 1855, Emperor Nicholas I died from pneumonia, and suddenly Maria was now Empress of Russia alongside her husband. But the passing of the torch couldn't have come at a worse time. Embroiled in the Crimean War, Russia had just surrendered in a humiliating defeat. In the summer of 1856, the Kremlin was lit up with all the opulence Alexander and Maria's court could muster, so their subjects could watch their coronation. Maria's attendants actually dropped her crown as they tried to place it on her head, and superstition or not, it was a bad omen. Although she was shy and unassuming, Maria actually held immense power. Alexander trusted her deeply and took her into his confidence when it came to ruling his increasingly unruly nation. She even helped him with his famous Emancipation Proclamation in 1861, which gave freedom to Russia's serfs, although it also stirred up further dissent from conservatives and radicals alike. With Maria's health getting worse with every baby she had, doctors told her she needed to completely stop sleeping with her husband, lest she get pregnant again and put her body through an ordeal it could no longer come back from. Alexander and Maria accepted their new reality as best they could, with Maria turning ever more to the upbringing of her children. The Tsarina's favourite child was her eldest son Nicholas, and she was overjoyed when he fell in love with Princess Dagmar of Denmark and chose her as his bride. As Maria prepared for her heir to marry, tragedy struck. While travelling through Europe, Nicholas contracted spinal meningitis, a version of the same illness that claimed his sister years before, and was suddenly on his deathbed. Faced with losing their heir, the Tsar and Tsarina made an unusual decision. When Maria went to see Nicholas in his final moments, she also brought her next eldest son, Alexander, with her, and she had ulterior motives. After Nicholas died, she wanted Dagmar to marry her younger son. In his last moments, Nicholas sanctioned the match as well, and the pair would marry just a year later. In April 1865, Maria watched as her favourite child slipped into unconsciousness and then slipped away. Maria still hadn't recovered from the loss of her first child, and watching Nicholas die completely broke her. A year after their son's passing, Alexander and Maria celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. Yet, despite this milestone, all was not well in the Imperial Union. The pair still got along well enough, but years of avoiding intimacy had done irreparable damage, and they now spent precious little time with each other. Tsar Alexander had always been boisterous, but in the last few years he'd developed a scandalous bad habit. He'd never been 100% faithful, but in 1865, the year of Nicholas's passing, Maria's husband dealt her the ultimate betrayal. He fell stupidly head over heels in love with a schoolgirl named Catherine Dolgorukova, and while Maria knew about his attentions towards Catherine, she assumed it was another infatuation and nothing to worry about. She was extremely mistaken. There were disturbing signs about Tsar Alexander and Catherine from the start. For one, the Tsar had first met Catherine when she was only 11 years old, but somehow didn't let that, or the nearly 30-year age gap, stop him from pursuing her as a teenager. More than that, Catherine was no dummy. She refused to give in to Alexander's advances for an entire year, stoking his obsession with her even further. In the spring of 1866, a rebel unhappy with Russia's policies tried to assassinate the Tsar. He nearly succeeded, with Alexander only making a narrow escape. It was the first real evidence that Maria and Alexander's hold over their nation was crumbling. But it got worse for Maria. Shaken and insecure, Alexander had gone not to his wife for consolation, but to his young protégée, Catherine. The Tsar wasn't content to just keep Catherine as his mistress. He swore to her that if he was ever free from Maria, he'd marry her. In 1874, Maria's only daughter married the English Prince Alfred, a younger son of Queen Victoria, and Maria wasn't happy about the union. She distrusted and disliked Victoria, once insulting her as a fishwife who was difficult to take seriously. When it came to British and Russian relations, the bad feelings were mutual. As the years passed and Maria's children grew up and got married, her life in Russia should have wound down to a quiet, peaceful end. This is not what happened. During the 1860s and 70s, her husband Alexander suffered another 3 assassination attempts from radicals discontent with the nation's conservative laws. In between nearly getting killed, Maria's wayward husband had been busy in the boudoir with his lover Catherine. By 1876, they had 3 children together, and Alexander would put her up in private apartments at the Winter Palace, often while Maria was there. For her 3rd pregnancy, Catherine even insisted she birth the child in the palace, right under Maria's nose. By 1880, Alexander had had so many attempts on his life, he no longer thought Catherine or his illegitimate children were safe out on their own in the city, so he just moved them all permanently into the Winter Palace. When Alexander decided to move Catherine and her brood into the Winter Palace, his timing was acutely malicious. In recent months, Maria's always shaky health had deteriorated fast, and doctors believed she wouldn't survive to see the next year. Luckily, the weak Maria had allies within her family. To the surprise of almost no one, except Alexander himself, Catherine was deeply unpopular both at court and within the royal family. Maria's children despised Catherine as an upstart and did everything they could to shun her. But Maria and Alexander's petty foibles were going to come crashing down around them, quite literally. In 1880, the Winter Palace turned into a hellscape. That March, assassins came for the Tsar again, blowing up the dining room of the palace at a time when the whole family was supposed to be eating. Luckily, dinner had been delayed that night, so while several guards perished, none of the royals were injured. Faced with his own mortality once more, Alexander's first thoughts were again not for his wife, but for his mistress. With the dining room crumbling around him, the Tsar went flying up the stairs to tend to Catherine, even though the frail, dying Maria was also in the palace and could have just as easily been injured. The younger nobles were furious at the Tsar's oversight, and they called in the cavalry. In May 1880, just weeks after the attack on the palace, Maria's daughter Marie came back from Britain to visit her dying mother. What she found shocked and appalled her. Catherine waltzing about the palace and Alexander all but ignoring his wife. In short order, Marie gave her father a tongue lashing that had him slinking away to a remote manor before paying Maria slightly more attention from then on. While everyone fumed at the Tsar and his new love, Maria's response was poignant. Knowing she was dying, she didn't see the use in holding a grudge. Instead, during some of her final moments, Maria asked that Alexander bring his illegitimate children up to her rooms so she could meet them for the first time. Maria had gone through too much loss throughout her life not to give grace to others. The Tsar brought up his eldest children, George and Olga, and Maria proceeded to kiss and bless them. By this point, both she and her husband were sobbing, overwhelmed with emotion. On June 3rd, 1880, Empress Maria Alexandrovna finally succumbed to her ill health, passing at the still young age of 55. Her funeral and burial were fit for a ruler of the Russian Empire, and her children and children-in-law mourned her deeply and remembered her class and elegance. Tsar Alexander, however, had much more disturbing plans in store for his wife's memory. Before Maria was cold in the ground, her husband committed one final treason. Mere months later, right after the official mourning period was up, Alexander married his mistress Catherine. But he was about to get some very dark karma. Maria and Alexander's reign knew endless years of unrest, and in 1881, just a year after her passing, it all finally came to a gruesome head. In March, mere months after his scandalous second marriage, radicals finally succeeded in taking out Alexander, attacking him with a series of bombs as he rode in his carriage through the snowy streets of St. Petersburg. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.